Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I think I was going to apologize firstly for, for sort of standing in between lunch and the audience there. But also, I think, this is, it's a great point to come in because of the remarks of the minister just before me, which are all really fine points that he raised. I think what I'll try to do is, from my perspective, try to maybe give three or four messages, I think, which may sort of relate to some of the discussions previously, and three or four examples. Firstly, thank you very much for having me here. Sorry not to be there physically. From ADB's perspective, and Pakistan is an extremely important member for the ADB, having been a founder of ADB back in 1966. We've had an office in Pakistan since 1989, almost 50 billion worth of assistance to Pakistan in different forms. So it's a very long-standing relationship. When I look at the climate finance issue, which has been very eloquently raised by a number of speakers before me, I think four things very important to sort of talk about, which lends into the instruments I'll talk about after. I think number one is scale. So we've discussed, as some of my colleagues over here who are also in the V20 know, the first thing is scale. There simply isn't the amount of concessional finance that we would like to have to make a lot of things work. Pakistan itself, I think the speaker before me mentioned, or the one before the minister mentioned, $350 billion worth of needs just in Pakistan. If you're looking at Southeast Asia, it's 200 billion a year. If you're looking at Asia Pacific, it's 1.7 trillion a year. And finance is basically will go to a market where there are great opportunities. That's a simple fact. So when you look at the scale issue, number one, that has a direct impact in terms of what instruments we can use. We just need a lot of money and quickly. That's number one. Number two is leverage. And this was the Minister for Finance raised this very nicely, that we must use what we have already better. How do we leverage budgets, development finance, concessional money, grants better? And the term that I used to use when I used to work with Dr. Marjun, when we were developing the green facility for China back in 2015, was 126. Can a dollar of development finance from the government, from from agencies like us, catalyze 5-6 times more finance from other sources? Number two, leverage. Number three is time, which is the reason why we're talking capital markets are not individual pilot projects, because we don't have the time given the vulnerabilities that many of our members and countries have. And number four is bankability and how to attain it. So those are the four key messages and targets that we need to achieve. How do we achieve this? What are the instruments to use? That's the question. Now, rather than academically talk about, the approaches, let me give you some thoughts and examples. So I was the country director for Thailand until about 2 months ago, and I was working there for the last 5 years. One of the instruments that we worked with in Thailand was the creation of a sovereign sustainability linked bond. Now, this was the first in Asia Pacific, a sovereign SLB. It's raised almost $1 billion for Thailand. It was 3 times oversubscribed. It could have been 3 times bigger. And it's a long duration finance. That's what you want. It's a 15-year maturity. Similar to the sustainability bond that was done in Thailand, we also worked in creating over the last 5 years a green social sustainability bonds initiative for Southeast Asia. Just if you hear the numbers, just the direct work that ADB did with the governments of Southeast Asia, mostly Thailand, since it was mostly being spearheaded by me in Thailand, was 5 billion issuances in the last 5 years. Just 5 billion from us directly, us working with the governments in raising the money from the markets. That has directly led to further issuances by the government, which has raised another $15 billion. So in terms of scale, capital markets work. They work, and they work fast if the instrument is well designed. That is a very, very strong example of how money has been catalyzed from the capital markets. Does it require a taxonomy? Yes, it does. We did that. Does it need the bond to be structured better? Yes, it does. And then the third part is affordability, which the minister very rightly raised. The issue with a lot of bonds or capital market, access to money is that, of course, there is a private sector return that the investors want. Can you make that bond more affordable? Yes, if we structured with incentives, with support from different agencies like the GCF, like ADB. There's a very good example of such an issue, a bond which was issued by Uruguay, which is heavily focused on nature. And that has a step up, step down. So there you have concessional finance available, which says if you hit a target faster, the cost of the coupon will be lower. So you can build in affordability with the right incentives into various bond structures. So that's one example I wanted to mention. Thailand bond, Uruguay bond. They work, they raise money fast, and they can be well applied. Number two is and this was again mentioned as an idea by the minister, about national green banks. A slightly different twist on it is creating national green facilities. So we've done this. We've worked on national green finance catalytic facilities, both in China. The first one that I worked on back in 2016-17 was the Shandong Green Fund. And more recently in Indonesia, which is called the SDG Indonesia one. The basic element is the same, to create national funds or regional funds at a bank in the country with the money to be used for de-risking projects. Now, whether we call this blended finance or leverage finance, the basic idea is that you have development money sitting there in a fund locally in that country, helping both develop the projects, but more importantly, reduce the risk of that project. Now, what is the risk? In certain projects, such as, in Pakistan, one big issue is water, wastewater, floods. The revenue streams may not be that clear. So can the fund provide some assurance in terms of the revenues going up or an annuity support for that? Maybe. So the structure of such national funds will be different. In Indonesia, we linked it to SDGs. In China, it was linked to green outcomes and indicators. And how that money is used can also differ. There's a viability gap fund, which has been set up for PPPs, which can provide both upfront money, and it can also provide an annual support like a revenue guarantee. These examples exist. So a national green fund, which basically does de-risking, whether at a general level, climate, or specific level. It could be for clean air, it could be for floods. These are examples which have existed in different parts of the world and are really good ways to go forward. The third example which I want to mention is payment for ecosystem services, something which is becoming increasingly popular. So ADB created something called the Nature Solutions Finance Hub. We launched it at COP. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. It's working now to do what? It's trying to build a pipeline, one of the big issues. So in a challenging area like biodiversity, so this is forests, this is landscapes, this is species protection, coastals, mangroves. We've got a blend of funding from different sources. This is the European Union, the German government, etc., OPEC fund, Saudi fund. They are supporting both the development of a pipeline of projects. So this is working with the communities on the ground, with local government agencies who may be very strong on environment, but not on finance. Working with them to say, okay, how does a structure work for coastal protection using mangroves? So there is technical assistance in there to develop the projects and strengthen the institutions. Extremely important. But there is also a de-risking fund that we've already got a little bit money for, but more is coming. That basically says, how do we help develop a revenue model for the underlying projects? Now, one great example of that is PES, Payment for Ecosystem Services. This has already been tried in a number of countries, whether we talk about in Brazil or Chile or Costa Rica, but also in our part of the world. So in the Philippines, in Vietnam. In Vietnam, Payment for Ecosystem Services, simple idea that those who are going to benefit from the protection of nature should pay something towards it. So hydro plants, water service companies, water supply companies, tourism, they provide a certain amount of money sitting in a fund which can then pay for the restoration of the biodiversity, whether it's planting mangroves, reforestation, etc. These are 3 or 4 examples of instruments which could work. Now, if I pull back, just because I've given a random selection of examples, almost responding to some of the previous comments, is if you look at this, you've got two approaches to instruments. One is instruments which can bring in money from outside. This is your capital markets, your bonds, asset monetization, disaster relief bonds. So this is structuring instruments which can raise money from outside sources. But it doesn't mean that you can ignore the other part of the equation, which is developing the projects. If there is no pipeline of bankable projects, which are affordable for people to be able to pay services for, affordable bankable projects, and which is at a scale which can use the money, there's no point in raising money from the capital markets. You need both to work. And the last part of that is institutions which can implement projects well. I've been working on floods projects where we've had to slice it into phases because the ability of the institution to absorb $2-3 billion to a floods infrastructure is not there yet. So we have to work gradually in building that capacity. So it's two parts. It's going out and accessing using instruments, and it's developing pipeline projects for which project preparation facilities, national grant facilities are critical. And we remain, available to keep working on this. As I close, I just want to sort of shine a light on disaster relief bonds, because both in the country that I was working in, Thailand, as well as the Philippines and Pakistan, we've been seeing a lot of emphasis on what's happened because of floods and devastation. It's been raised a number of times. Literally a few days ago, ADB's done one of the first issuances of disaster bonds, what we call disaster relief bonds. This is very interesting because it's raising money from global markets, from insurance, which provides a very quick relief in the event of certain triggers of disasters. A very interesting instrument, disaster relief bonds, which are worth looking at because it's combining insurance, capital markets, creating funds at the national level, and something which can be developed. My very last word, which is nothing works if you don't have institutions of delivery who can absorb the money and implement the projects, not just technical, but the financial use of money in a sustainable manner. And for that, where we really, really need to focus heavily and things are being done in different parts is subnational. We are working with state-owned enterprises to improve their capacity to raise and use money better, but also city governments who really will be doing a lot of work on water, floods, heat, air pollution. The city-level governments have to be better structured and be better empowered to really use the money that we can raise for them, with them, at the national level. So that's just a very quick overview of things. I'm sure it cannot match the passion of the minister who spoke before me, but I hope it helps, provide at least some ideas for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you so